Hello everybody, it's me, the Boss Hog, and today I'd like to talk about restricted trading. I've mentioned it over the last couple of months. What is it, why I'm impacted by it, and what I have to do to make sure I don't upset the SEC or my wife's employer. Let's do it. Okay, so a couple of months ago, my wife got a new job at a private equity firm. They're an American company with a UK office. Her job gives her exposure into basically all of their portfolio. There's about 400 companies with about 30 billion under assets under management. And before she started, we got through a relatively detailed list that I'm going to share with you now in terms of the rules, what we can do, what we can't do for my investments, basically, and indeed our investments. And you're about to see that this concerns what's under the household primarily, which obviously includes both me and my wife. So we did obviously consider this before she accepted. And from my and our perspective, it was a really great job. It was clear that the company liked her. It was a significant increase in salary. And ultimately, it was viewed reasonably that these restrictions were worth the equivalent that she was going to be getting in additional take home, plus a new job in a new industry that should be quite lucrative in the long run. So it was a relatively easy decision, but it does have some impacts in terms of what those restrictions are, what we're allowed to do, and even indeed we have to do a report that I'm going to walk you through at the end as well. So without further ado, let's have a look at my current restrictions. So every time I talk about restrictions, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, sorry for the eye chart, but hopefully you can see this, and I'm going to walk through it anyway. I've replaced the company's name with the word company because it doesn't matter who the company is. You won't have heard of them. And now let's just walk through in terms of what I can't do first of all. So first of all, the trading policy applies to all people in the household. So it would be me, my wife, and indeed my 3-year-old daughter if she was quite into shares yet. She's not, but ultimately it affects me as well as my wife. So employees in their households cannot, and this is a good list, buy public company stock. So just to be super clear here, individual listed companies on any stock exchange cannot be purchased. Pretty simple. There is a few caveats to that, which we'll get to in a second. Cannot buy or sell companies on my wife's employer's company restricted list. Now, obviously, or I think obviously, the company isn't too keen on publishing like the list of assets that they own. They're a private company, so they don't have to do that. And obviously, there's strategic merit in keeping those things relatively confidential. So the way that this works basically is if I want to buy or sell, well, I mean, I can't buy, but if I wanted to sell a company that they also had a stake in, then I have to basically get pre-clearance before selling, which we'll get to in just a second. But ultimately, it means that I have to basically say, guys, is this company on your restricted list? And then they tell me yes or no. If it is, then I don't actually know what will happen. If not, then we can just proceed with selling. Engage in any derivative transactions. So for me, this isn't a cost at all. Options, futures, etc. I don't dabble in that stuff. This is an easy one for me. Buy or sell in IPOs. So, you know, I avoid IPOs anyway. I think they're often overpriced, but they're also quite uncertain. Okay, fine. I've never purchased or taken part in an IPO, but interesting to know likewise. Buy or sell securities whilst in possession of MNPI, which material non-public information. So basically, if you have insider information, you can't then action any transaction with that knowledge. Okay, fine. Again, I don't have access to that in my job, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. So that's easy. I suppose from my wife's perspective, you know, and this is why they're a bit sensitive about it, she might have some information about a company that they're invested in, and that could be quite material. And again, this is one of the things that they're so keen to avoid, basically, in terms of insider trading and the SEC coming down on them. So in terms of selling securities, so I am technically allowed to sell securities. I haven't sold any positions since my wife started, which was on the 25th of July. However, this week for the first time, I have asked if I can sell out of about half a position. So, you know, if you watch a video this week, you should see a relatively chunky sale in there just because it's an opportunity for me to diversify in the current market. And basically, there are two things to consider here. So first of all, after my wife had accepted the position, but before she started, I was allowed to sell any positions that I wanted to, you know, and I did that. I reviewed the portfolio. I exited out of a few positions I wasn't sure on because as soon as she started, basically, I'm not restricted in terms of what I can do. But before she starts, she doesn't have access to any inside information, right? So they don't mind if I use that period of time to get my portfolio in order. The other condition is I can sell if I ask them in advance, and then what happens is they basically give me clearance to sell, or, I'd like to sell 100 shares in this company. They then authorize it, and then I have a day to action that sale. So that's how it currently works, basically. And as part of that, I have to basically say, just let you know, I have no insider information. I just want to sell this stock. Please confirm it's okay. And that's what I'm currently going through at the moment with the shares that I will be selling this week. So that's interesting. Yeah, pre-clearance is on the same day only, and the company complies with blackout trading windows for all public portfolio companies. So again, anything that they have a position in basically within their portfolio. So fine. This is also pretty interesting. So private investments. So employees in their household must pre-clear all private investments. Now for us, we don't really have any private investments. It would be different, for example, if I had like a share scheme, you'll see that mentioned in a second, or if I was dabbling in private investments. But the closest thing I have to private investments is my position in the Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust, and because that's basically a fund, I'm allowed to invest in that, as we'll see in just a second. But I can't buy individual private companies any more than I can take positions in public companies without basically pre-clearance. So it's pretty strict. So first of all, they divide it between non-technology and technology. That I think is just because they're a technology focused private equity company themselves, and there's just a different layer of bureaucracy to get through if you want to buy private investments. So private non-technology goes to their company's compliance committee, and private technology goes to the advisory committee of the company's current fund. So there you go, that's how that works. And in terms of, so you can basically, my wife hasn't been there long enough to get advantage of this, but it could be an option in the future. So investing in the company's portfolio companies. So again, employees and their household are prohibited from investing in company portfolios other than through an investment in a company fund. So that's kind of similar to what I was just speaking about there. So cannot buy individual companies that the company happens to own a stake of. And just to be super clear on that, so that would be an example where, let's take Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust. So that's a fund, and you'll see in a second I am allowed to buy that fund, and they might have a position in a company that my wife's employer has a position in, but there's enough disconnect for them because I'm not buying a position in the individual company, right? I'm buying a position in the fund that just so happens to own part of that company as well. So an interesting something to be very mindful of there. And last but not least, all political contributions and political activities. Again, this was an interesting one, not strictly about insider trading or restricted trading, but I also thought this was really interesting. Now, for me and my wife, we don't really, we've never made a political donation. It's not something I can imagine happening in the future. We're not a member of any party, none of that affiliation. But I also thought even that was quite interesting. They just want to be sort of so above board, and or they're terrified of the regulator for sort of misstepping that you can't even do that. So these are all my restrictions basically. Again, I appreciate I put some words beyond what's technically their words, but before my wife started, I had an email exchange with their compliance office just to make sure I understood the specifics of this. And as you'll see in a second, these are the restrictions, but just to make it super easy, there is also a list of allowable purchases. So let's have a look at that now. All right, so in terms of what I can buy, employees and obviously their household, so my wife and me, may buy or sell the following kinds of securities without pre-clearance. So mutual funds, fine. ETFs, again, fine. Muni is in municipal and government securities, not something I personally invest in, but fine, understood. Short-term debt securities, again, not something I dabble in. Securities in a fully managed account. So this one I think is worth explaining. So let's say that I had a wealth manager, like somebody actively managing my account, then they are permitted to basically act on my behalf, because again, they should have their own legal and ethical positions where they can't, take the information I'm giving them. So as long as they are managing my account and they're presumably willing to sign off that they are, and I have no involvement in it, then they can actually buy and sell. So if they wanted to say buy new shares in Microsoft, then they could on my behalf, as long as they weren't doing that because I had insider information, right? So that is worth considering. However, I'm not really that interested in going down that route at the moment, just because I don't want to lose like 2.5% management fees every year. And it's just, I don't really think I'd get enough value out of it anyway, but that's an option. Security trade is part of an automatic investment plan. So this is a good caveat, right? I mentioned beforehand that in most cases I can't buy individual shares. There are a couple of caveats. The big one for me is the drip here. So I think everyone will know that, but just to be clear, that's dividend reinvestment plan. So, I can't go out and buy new shares in Microsoft unless I'm using dividend from Microsoft's dividend to buy more Microsoft shares. That's completely allowed because what happened is before my wife joined, I had to provide my portfolio, and those positions got grandfathered into the scheme. So they could see when my wife started, I had positions in Microsoft as well as all my other holdings, and therefore, when they pay dividends, I can reinvest that into the individual companies. So that's fine. The 10B51 here, this is like about if you were on a share scheme in your company. So let's say I was working for a public company that had shares, or indeed a private company that had shares. It would be a similar sort of setup. And I was on a share scheme, and as part of that scheme, I had an agreement with my employer to regularly buy £2,000 worth of shares, or etc., right, a number of shares every month, or vice versa, right, to sell down my position. Then that agreement basically proceeds as long as it's shared with these. So as long as it's an automatic plan, where again the important thing is I'm not using any knowledge I might have of that company to buy or sell, right? It's automated and done, and I have an obvious reason for being in it. So just to be clear also, like with DRIP, it has to be reinvested in the same company that I got the dividend from. So I can't get a Microsoft dividend and buy Amazon shares. It has to be back into the same company I got it from. Or I can use the dividend to buy a fund. That's also completely acceptable, right? So I don't have to do dividend reinvesting. Like if I got a dividend and I thought it would be better spent elsewhere, then I don't have to go into Microsoft. I can instead put the fund toward a ETF, right? Sorry, the dividend toward an ETF. So these are basically what I'm allowed to do as it stands at the moment. Anything else basically either can't be done at all or needs pre-clearance in order to do it. So, oh yeah, and sorry, I always forget about this one, but this isn't really one for me because I don't do investments in cryptocurrencies. I don't really consider cryptocurrencies investing, and I don't understand it, and I think it's too speculative. And maybe because there is no such thing as insider trading with cryptocurrencies, unless it's a scam. Then this is also allowed without any caveats at all. So you can buy or sell these things. And again, just to be super clear, if I had a position in, say, Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust and I wanted to sell shares in SMT, then I could. I wouldn't have to get that pre-cleared, right? Because it's a fund. I can buy and sell funds and everything else listed here without pre-clearance. It's just if it's individual positions, that's when I need the pre-clearance. So that's a list of what I can and can't do, but this isn't all I need to do, basically. So when my wife started, I mentioned that things were grandfathered into the scheme, right? So my wife's employer knows our investments. What I then need to do is at the end of every quarter, I need to send them a report showing all my transactions, and we're going to have a little look at that now. All right, so I've minimized my face here, but I just wanted to walk through this quarterly report. So this is what I provided for the end of September. Now, my wife also has to upload these into the system manually. They have told me that in the future they'll hope to have that all automated, and this is the format that I've been asked to send it into. So you can see here in column A, you've got the account. So when I talk about my portfolio, it's just, I talk about a single portfolio, but actually we've got three different accounts, right? We've got an ISA, so an individual savings account for my wife, one for me as well, and then we have a general investment account where we have a couple of stocks as well, so a taxable account where we have a few things, and then we've got the ticker from Google, the company from Google, what the shares were when we started, so basically from the 25th of July, what they were at the end of September, the change, and basically the reason for the change, so of which new capital and which drip. And most of this is fairly self-explanatory. There's a list here of like 30 odd, 40 odd positions, which is everything in my portfolio. Some of these haven't changed at all, right? Like Salesforce, no dividend. I can't buy shares, and I haven't sold anything at all between when my wife started and the end of September. But some of these are a bit different, like Phoenix, for example. Now there was actually a dividend for Phoenix during the period, and in theory, I could have dividend reinvested into Phoenix, but at the time it was pretty green for me, and so instead I chose to put it into SMT, where basically that money is counted as new capital. So again, that's what we were speaking about earlier, right? Now, on top of that, I did also get a dividend from SMT, so I was able here to drip an additional bit of money into it as well. So that was great. and similar, etc. down here for T Rowe. Now here with T Rowe, again, this is an individual company, even though it's a broad sort of proxy to the market, but it's still classed as an individual share. And so as such, I can't put new capital into it, but what I can do is, reinvest, which is exactly what we did here. So when I got the dividend, I decided that I'd like to buy more T Rowe. So that's what I did. Now you'll see a few of these, like all of the ETFs, were zero when we started because other than SMT, which is more of a fund than an ETF, I didn't have any ETFs, right? So they've gone from zero to there, and basically new capital here is completely allowed because it's a fund or an ETF. And some of these are distributing. So again, I'm getting dividends from them. So this one here for the global real estate, one of my favorites at the moment. We also got a dividend for that, so I just bought some shares from the dividend as well. So this is basically the summary of every position and what's changed over the quarter. And then on the second tab here, this is basically our transactions that relate to that. So the date of the transaction, the stock name according to Trading 212, my brokerage, the Google Docs reference, what type of transaction it was. And here, like, this is a nice easy one to see. Like this one here is for Micron Technologies, right? NASDAQ MU. This here is a dividend line, so I've got 527 in dividends, and I bought 527 in Micron. Great, easy to understand, I think. And then here I had some deposits, right, 800, 800. So these now should hopefully come to 1600, and indeed they do. And that's obviously where the deposits have been going for the buys. So this is basically just the detail of everything that's represented on the summary. And basically, yeah, once a quarter, within 2 weeks of the closing of the quarter, I have to submit this report to my wife's employer's compliance team. As well as submitting this report, she then still currently has to load it up in her system, which is definitely a bit of a pain. And this is how it currently works. So I just wanted to walk through it, explain what I mean by restricted trading, why we have it, what the implications are. They are relatively significant restrictions, I would say. Definitely her employer is particularly concerned at even the implication of insider trading. And again, my wife's job does mean that she has, my wife has like a compliance and process type job. So it means that she does have exposure and knowledge to many of their positions. So I can see why they're careful. And obviously at the same time, we just have to respond to it. So it's a small pain. This sheet, now that I've largely automated it, took me about half an hour to put together, and ultimately it's going to be about half an hour until my wife leaves there, which, we don't know how long that's going to be, a couple of years at least, I imagine. So this is what we're dealing with. Hopefully now it's a bit clearer when I talk about restrictive trading. Any questions, comments, etc., below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, everyone. I've been the Boss Hog, and good luck with your investing. Bye for now.